Corporal Davis pushed open the infirmary door. German prisoners lay in clean beds, ceiling fans spinning, white sheets, his own men outside on the dirt, bleeding. The base commander looked up from his desk. His eyes said everything. Davis felt the order before he heard it. 6 hours earlier, the convoy had rolled into Camp Shelby through August heat that turned metal into griddles. The 92nd Infantry Division Medic Unit, 20 men, Davis commanding. They had driven straight from Fort Huachuca, Arizona, 40 hours, no sleep. The trucks carried wounded soldiers from a training accident, live fire exercise gone wrong. 17 men hit, 3 critical. Private Wilson had taken shrapnel to the chest. Sergeant Franklin's leg was shattered below the knee. Specialist Moore kept slipping in and out of consciousness. The radio crackled. Field hospital coordinates. They pushed the engines harder. When they arrived, the sun was straight overhead. The field hospital sat behind barbed wire fencing, long wooden buildings, red crosses painted on roofs, medical tents erected in rows. Davis jumped from the lead truck. His boots hit gravel. He ran toward the main building. 2 white officers stood on the steps smoking. Davis saluted. "Permission to bring in, wounded sir." The officers looked at each other. The taller one, a captain named Richter, spoke. "You'll have to wait, Corporal. We have a situation." Davis heard Wilson coughing blood in the truck behind him. "Sir, these men need immediate attention." Richter dropped his cigarette, crushed it with his heel. "Orders came down this morning. All German prisoners get medical priority. Geneva Convention protocols." Davis felt his jaw tighten. "Sir, with respect, we have Americans dying." Richter's face went cold. "I don't make the rules, Corporal. I follow them. Get your men in line. Wait your turn." Davis walked back to the convoy, his hands shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Franklin looked up from the truck bed, his face pale, sweat pouring. "Sarge, what's happening?" Davis couldn't answer. He turned to his unit. "Get the stretchers. Move them to the shade." His men lifted Wilson first. The private's breathing was shallow, rapid, his shirt soaked red. They carried him to a patch of dirt under a pine tree, laid him down. No blankets, no pillows, just Mississippi dust and August heat. Moore came next, then Franklin, then the others. 17 men, bleeding onto American soil. While inside the infirmary, German voices spoke in their native tongue. An ambulance arrived 20 minutes later. 3 more German POWs, captured during North Africa campaigns. They walked off the vehicle, bandages on their arms, minor wounds. Guards escorted them inside immediately. Davis watched through the window. Nurses appeared, clean uniforms. They guided the Germans to beds, offered water. One prisoner smiled. Actually smiled. Davis felt something crack inside his chest. Wilson's breathing changed. Davis dropped to his knees beside him. The private's eyes were open, staring at nothing, his lips moving, no sound coming out. Davis grabbed his hand. "Stay with me, soldier." Wilson's grip was weak. A nurse appeared, white woman, older. She knelt on the other side, took Wilson's pulse. She looked at Davis. "He needs surgery now." Davis pointed toward the infirmary. "Then get him inside." The nurse shook her head. "I can't." "Orders?" Davis stood. His voice came out louder than he intended. "That's an American soldier." She stood too. Her face showed something. Not anger. Pity, maybe. "I know what he is, Corporal. I also know what I've been told." She walked back toward the building, her shoulders tight. Moore started convulsing. Davis and another medic named Lewis held him down. The seizure lasted 30 seconds. When it stopped, Moore went limp, his pulse thread weak. Davis shouted for help. No one came. Inside the infirmary, a German prisoner laughed at something. The sound carried through open windows. Lewis looked at Davis, his eyes asking a question Davis couldn't answer. The sun moved west. 2 hours passed. Wilson's breathing grew more shallow. Franklin's legs swelled. The bone fragments were moving, infection setting in. Davis counted wounds, counted minutes, watched German prisoners get escorted to X-ray rooms, to surgery, to recovery wards. His own men lay in dirt, flies gathering, heat pressing down like a weight. Richter appeared on the steps. He lit another cigarette. Davis walked toward him. "Sir, I'm requesting immediate medical attention." Richter exhaled smoke. Request denied. The anger Davis had been holding broke through. "Sir, these men are dying." Richter's voice stayed flat. "The prisoners are protected under international law. Your men will be treated when space allows." Davis stepped closer. "International law." Richter met his eyes. "That's correct." Davis felt his hands curl into fists. "And what about American law? What about the men who wear this uniform?" Richter dropped his cigarette. "I suggest you step back, Corporal. That's an order." Davis didn't move. Behind him, Wilson made a wet sound. Choking. Davis turned, ran back. The private was drowning in his own blood. Davis tilted his head, tried to clear his airway. Wilson's eyes found his, focused, then didn't. The light went out, just like that. 22 years old, from Chicago, dead on Mississippi dirt. While inside the building a German officer received fresh bandages, Lewis stood slowly, his face blank. Sarge. Davis closed Wilson's eyes. He stayed kneeling. The heat, the flies, the sound of German voices. It all pressed in. He thought of his mother in Georgia, of the letters she sent, telling him to serve with honor, to make her proud. He thought of the oath he took, to defend his country, all of it. He stood, his uniform soaked with Wilson's blood. He looked at the infirmary door, at Richter on the steps, at his men dying in the dirt. The decision formed, clear, simple, irreversible. Davis walked toward the infirmary, his boots leaving red prints. Richter moved to block him. "Stand down, Corporal." Davis kept walking. The captain grabbed his arm. Davis shrugged it off. "Sir, I'm bringing my men inside." Richter's voice rose. "You'll be court-martialed." Davis reached the door. "Then court-martial me." He pushed it open. The cool air hit him first. Air conditioning. The infirmary was clean, white tile floors, chrome fixtures, German prisoners in beds, some sleeping, others reading. A Nazi officer sat propped up with pillows, drinking coffee. Real coffee. Davis saw empty cups on the bedside tables, food trays with half-eaten meals, fresh fruit, the smell of antiseptic and soap. In the corner, a radio played classical music, Mozart maybe. Davis didn't know, didn't care. A doctor appeared, white coat, stethoscope around his neck. "Can I help you?" His tone was annoyed, not concerned. Davis's voice came out steady. "I have 17 wounded men outside." The doctor barely looked at him. "They'll have to wait. Geneva protocols." Davis felt the scalpel in his pocket. He'd grabbed it from his field kit, not as a weapon, as a tool, as proof of what he was, what he'd trained to be. A medic, someone who saved lives, not someone who watched Americans die while enemies received comfort. He walked past the doctor, toward an empty surgery room. The doctor shouted, "You can't be in here." Davis ignored him. He opened the door, surgical lights, clean instruments, empty table. He turned back. Outside, Franklin was screaming, the infection spreading. Moore had stopped moving entirely. Davis looked at the German in the bed, drinking coffee, smiling. He looked at the empty surgery room, at the tools, at everything his country had given the enemy, everything it denied its own. His hand moved to the scalpel, not to threaten, to remember. He was a medic, trained to heal, sworn to protect. The decision he made in the next 5 seconds would define everything, his career, his life, maybe his soul. But outside in the Alabama heat, his brothers were dying. And inside this air-conditioned building, the men who'd tried to kill them were being saved. Davis walked back outside, his jaw set, his mind clear. He gathered his unit. Lewis, Thompson, Rodriguez, Hayes, All of them. Listen up. We're bringing our men inside, whatever it takes. The men looked at each other. Sarge, that's a direct violation. Davis met each of their eyes. I know what it is. I also know what's right. Wilson's dead. Franklin's dying. I won't watch another brother bleed out while prisoners get beds. You don't have to follow. This is on me. No one moved. Then Lewis picked up a stretcher. Thompson grabbed the other end. The rest followed. They carried Franklin first, his screams echoing. Then more. Then the others, one by one, into the infirmary, past Richter, past the doctor, past the Germans watching from their beds. Davis led them to the surgery room, kicked the door open, laid Franklin on the table. The doctor appeared, his face red. I'm calling the MPs. Davis didn't look at him, then call them. Right now, this man needs surgery. Start prepping. The doctor hesitated. Behind them, Richter was shouting into a phone. Davis heard boots running. The MPs were coming. He had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. He looked at Franklin, at the shattered leg, at the infection turning the skin black. He looked at his unit, at men who'd followed him into this, into something that could destroy all of them. He picked up a scalpel, the real one, from the surgical tray, his hands steady. If the doctor wouldn't operate, he would. He'd watched enough surgeries, assisted in dozens. It wasn't legal, wasn't proper. But Franklin was dying. Davis pressed the blade to skin, started the incision. The doctor grabbed his wrist. Stop! You'll kill him. Davis met his eyes. He's dying anyway. Either help me or get out. The door burst open. 3 MPs, white soldiers, rifles ready. Corporal Davis stepped away from the patient. Davis kept his hands on Franklin. He didn't look up. He needed 30 more seconds, just 30 seconds to stop the bleeding, to save one life, one brother. The MPs moved closer. Sir, we will use force. Davis's hands moved faster. Franklin's pulse was dropping. The infection had spread to the blood, sepsis setting in. 20 seconds, 15. The MP reached for him. Davis felt hands on his shoulders, pulling him back. The scalpel fell from his grip, clattered on the tile. Franklin's eyes opened, found Davis, tried to speak, couldn't. They dragged Davis into the hallway, pushed him against the wall. His hands were pulled behind his back. Cuffs clicked shut. Cold metal, tight. The MPs were talking, words he didn't process. His eyes stayed on the surgery room, on Franklin, on his men, on everything he'd tried to do, everything that had failed. Richter appeared, his face tight with fury. You just ended your career, Corporal, possibly your life. Davis finally looked at him, his voice quiet. Then it was worth it. Richter turned away. The MPs started to move him. Davis looked back one more time, through the door, at the infirmary, at German prisoners in clean beds, at his men still bleeding, at the choice he'd made, the line he'd crossed, the price he'd pay. Outside the sun was setting, the Alabama heat finally breaking. Somewhere across the ocean the war raged on. Men died in trenches and jungles and desert sands. They died for flags and countries and ideas bigger than themselves. But here in Mississippi, on American soil, the war looked different. It looked like a black corporal in handcuffs. It looked like wounded soldiers denied care. It looked like the enemy receiving mercy while brothers received dust. Davis closed his eyes, felt the weight of the cuffs, the weight of the decision, the weight of knowing that in trying to save his men he might have condemned himself. But when he opened his eyes again, he saw Wilson's face, saw the light go out, and he knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again, every time, without hesitation. The MPs led him away, his boots scraping concrete. Behind him, Franklin screamed. The sound cut off suddenly. Then silence. Davis didn't turn around, didn't need to. He already knew. Some wounds don't heal. Some choices don't get second chances. Some lines once crossed change everything. The guard tower loomed ahead. The stockade, his new home, maybe his last. But as they pushed him through the gates, Davis felt something unexpected, not regret, not fear, something closer to peace. He had been a medic. He had tried to heal. And if that made him a criminal in the eyes of the army, then maybe the army needed to look at itself. The cell door closed, locked, dark. The cell door opened at dawn. 2 MPs stood in the doorway. Davis sat up, his back stiff from the metal cot. One MP spoke. "On your feet, Corporal. Jag wants you." Davis stood. His wrists were cuffed again. They led him across the compound. Morning sun cutting through the pine trees. Soldiers stared as they passed. Word had spread. The black medic who defied orders, who forced his way into the infirmary, who put his hands on a white officer. The Judge Advocate General's office was a converted barracks. Inside, a major sat behind a desk. Files stacked high. Nameplate read Brennan. The MPs pushed Davis into a chair. Brennan didn't look up. He shuffled papers. Made Davis wait. Finally, he spoke. "You know why you're here." Davis said nothing. Brennan's eyes lifted. "I asked you a question." Davis met his gaze. "Yes, sir." Brennan leaned back. "Then let's hear your version." Davis told it straight. The convoy, the wounded, Wilson dying, the order to wait, Franklin screaming, the Germans in clean beds, every detail. Brennan took notes, his pen scratching. When Davis finished, the major set down his pen. "You assaulted a superior officer." Davis shook his head. I pushed past him. Brennan smiled. "Not Richter. The doctor." You grabbed his wrist. "That's assault." Davis felt his jaw tighten. He was refusing to treat a dying man. Brennan picked up a file. According to hospital records, Franklin died at 2100 hours. That's 3 hours after you were arrested. Davis's breath caught. "What?" Brennan looked at him. "Your little stunt didn't save anyone. Made it worse, actually. Franklin went septic. The infection you exposed during your unauthorized surgery." Davis felt the room tilt. I was trying to help him. Brennan closed the file. "The road to hell, Corporal." The major stood. "Walk to the window. You're looking at 20 years hard labor, maybe execution, courts-martial for assaulting an officer during wartime, disobeying direct orders, inciting mutiny." Davis heard the word mutiny. "Sir, I didn't incite anything. My men followed me." Brennan turned. "Exactly. You gave illegal orders. They obeyed. That makes them accomplices." "Unless," he paused. "Unless what, sir?" Brennan returned to his desk. "Unless you take responsibility. Say you acted alone." They were following what they thought were legitimate orders. Davis understood. "They want me to fall alone. Take the weight." Brennan nodded. "Plead guilty. Accept court-martial. We'll recommend leniency. 10 years, maybe less. Your men walk free." Davis looked at his cuffed hands. "And if I don't?" Brennan's face went hard. "Then we charge all of them. Lewis, Thompson, Rodriguez, Hayes, every man who touched a stretcher. 20 soldiers, 20 careers destroyed, 20 families without fathers. Your choice, Corporal." They took Davis back to the cell. He had 48 hours to decide. That afternoon, Lewis was brought to an adjacent cell. Davis heard him through the wall. "Lewis, you there?" A pause. Then Lewis's voice. "Yes, Sarge. I'm here." Davis pressed his hand against the concrete. "They're offering a deal, trying to make me take it all." Lewis was quiet. Then he spoke. "Whatever you decide, we're with you." Davis closed his eyes. "That's what I'm afraid of." The next day, a lawyer arrived. "Captain Bennett, black officer rare in the JAG Corps." He sat across from Davis in the interrogation room, read through the charges. His face gave nothing away. When he finished, he set down the papers. "They've got you, Corporal. Multiple witnesses. Clear chain of command violations. The Geneva Convention protocols are binding." Davis leaned forward. "So I'm supposed to let Americans die?" Bennett held up his hand. I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying you broke the law. There's a difference." Davis felt anger rise. What kind of law puts enemies before soldiers? Bennett's voice stayed level, the kind that keeps our boys alive when they're captured. "You think the Germans will treat our POWs well if we start violating conventions?" Davis hadn't thought about it that way. Bennett continued, "It's a system. Ugly, unfair sometimes, but it keeps both sides from complete savagery. You broke that system." He paused. "But here's the thing. The army knows how this looks. Black medics watching their brothers die while Nazis get beds, headlines, newspapers, NAACP already asking questions. They want this quiet. That's why the deal." Davis studied Bennett. "What do you think I should do?" The captain was quiet. Then he spoke carefully. "I think you need to decide what matters more. 10 years of your life, or proving a point that might destroy 20 families." That night, Davis couldn't sleep. He heard footsteps, guards changing shifts. Somewhere a radio played. Bing Crosby singing White Christmas. The song felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. He thought about Wilson's face, the light going out, Franklin screaming, Moore's seizures, his mother's letters, serve with honor. He'd tried to be what she wanted, what the uniform demanded, and it had led here, to a cell, to a choice between his freedom and his men's. Morning came. Brennan returned, sat down, lit a cigarette. "Well, Corporal, what's it going to be?" Davis looked at the smoke curling toward the ceiling. "I want to go to trial." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "You understand what that means?" Davis nodded. "Yes, sir. Full court-martial, all charges." Brennan leaned forward. "You'll lose. Your men will go down with you." Davis's voice stayed steady. "Then let them decide. Give them the same choice. If they want to take the deal individually, let them, but don't make me condemn them." Brennan crushed his cigarette. "You're a fool." Davis almost smiled. "Maybe. But I'm not a coward." The trial was set for 2 weeks. Davis was allowed visitors. His unit came one by one. Lewis first. He sat across from Davis, his face tired. "They offered me a deal." Davis nodded. "I know. Take it." Lewis shook his head. "Not without you." Davis grabbed his hand through the bars. "You have a wife, 2 kids. Take the deal." Lewis pulled away, his voice hard. "You don't get to make that choice for me. We went in together. We'll face it together." He left before Davis could argue. Thompson came next, then Rodriguez, then Hayes. Each one said the same thing. "We're not taking the deal. We're testifying." Davis tried to convince them, tried to make them see reason. None of them listened. Finally, Hayes said what they were all thinking. "You taught us something, Sarge, that some things matter more than safety, more than orders. Wilson mattered, Franklin mattered. If the army wants to punish us for that, then maybe we're better off out of this uniform." The days passed slowly. Davis exercised in his cell, push-ups, sit-ups, anything to keep his mind occupied. Bennett visited regularly, prepared him for testimony, explained the charges, the defense strategy. It wasn't much of a strategy. They were guilty. The only question was whether the court would understand why, whether context mattered, whether justice and law were the same thing. One afternoon a package arrived from his mother. Inside was a Bible, a letter. Davis read her words. She'd heard about the charges, about the trial. She wrote that she was proud, that he'd done what was right, that God saw everything, that truth would prevail. Davis held the letter, his hands shaking, not from fear, from something else. His mother believed in him, believed in justice. He wished he could. The night before the trial, Davis lay awake. He thought about the oath, to defend the Constitution, to obey orders, to serve with honor. He'd broken the second, maybe violated the third, but somehow he felt he'd honored the first. The Constitution promised equality, liberty, justice for all, not just for some, not just for the white, not just for the free, for all. And if keeping that promise meant breaking ranks, then maybe ranks needed to be broken. Morning arrived, the MPs came, Davis was led to the courtroom, a converted mess hall, chairs arranged in rows, a judge's bench, prosecution table, defense table. The room filled quickly, officers, enlisted men, reporters from Negro newspapers, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender. This wasn't just about Davis anymore. It was about something larger, about who deserved care, who deserved dignity, who mattered. The judge entered, Colonel Patterson, white, Southern accent. Everyone stood. Patterson sat, gestured for them to follow. The prosecution began. Captain Warner, sharp voice, clipped words. He laid out the charges: assault, disobedience, inciting mutiny. Each word landed like a hammer. He called his first witness, Captain Richter, the officer who'd given the order, who'd told Davis to wait. Richter took the stand, swore in. Warner asked him to describe the events. Richter did. His version painted Davis as unstable, aggressive, insubordinate. He described being shoved, being threatened, the unauthorized entry, the chaos. When Warner finished, Bennett stood to cross-examine. Captain Richter, how many American soldiers were waiting for treatment? Richter paused. 17. And how many German prisoners were in the infirmary? Richter's jaw tightened. Approximately 30. Bennett nodded. 30 prisoners, with minor injuries, while 17 Americans, critically wounded, waited outside. Richter's voice rose. The Geneva Convention requires... Bennett cut him off. I'm familiar with the convention, Captain. I'm asking about your priorities. Warner objected. Patterson sustained it. Bennett moved on. The doctor testified next, described Davis grabbing his wrist. The illegal surgery attempt, the contamination. Bennett asked one question. Doctor, was Franklin receiving any treatment when Corporal Davis entered the surgery? The doctor hesitated. No, but... Bennett interrupted. No further questions. The prosecution rested. Bennett called his witnesses. Lewis first. The medic described the convoy, Wilson's condition, the weight. His testimony was careful, factual. He never said Davis was right, just that he was desperate, that they all were. Warner tore into him on cross, tried to make him admit mutiny. Lewis held firm. I followed orders from my commanding officer. Warner pressed, even illegal orders. Lewis looked at the judge. Sir, I'm a medic. When a superior tells me to save a life, I don't question it, Thompson testified. Then Rodriguez, then Hayes. Each told the same story. Wounded men, denied care, a commander trying to save them. By the time they finished, it was late afternoon. Patterson called a recess, told them to return tomorrow. Davis was led back to his cell. Bennett walked with him part of the way. How do you think it went? Davis shrugged. Hard to say. Bennett nodded. Tomorrow you testify. Tell the truth. All of it. Don't hold back. Davis looked at him. Even if it makes me look worse. Bennett smiled slightly. Especially then. The only chance we have is if they see you as human. Not a symbol, not a criminal. Just a man who made an impossible choice. That night, Davis practiced his testimony, went through every detail, every decision, every moment that led to the cell door closing. He thought about what Bennett said, about being human, about impossible choices. He'd made his choice. Now he had to live with it or die with it either way. Tomorrow would decide everything. The cell was cold, the cot hard. But Davis slept better than he had in weeks, because whatever happened next, whatever the court decided, he'd told the truth. He'd stood up. He'd tried to save his brothers. And if that was a crime, then maybe the crime wasn't his alone. Maybe the crime was the system that forced the choice, the policy that valued protocol over lives, the war that made enemies more important than allies. Tomorrow he would say that. Tomorrow he would make them hear it. Tomorrow he would face whatever came, without regret, without apology, with the same conviction that put him in that cell, the conviction that some things, some lives, some brothers, are worth any price. The courtroom filled before dawn. Davis was brought in through a side door, hands cuffed. The MPs removed them once he sat at the defense table. Bennett was already there, files open, notes spread. He looked at Davis. "Ready?" Davis nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." The room buzzed, voices low, every seat taken, officers in pressed uniforms, enlisted men standing against the walls, reporters with notepads. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. Colonel Patterson entered. Everyone stood. The judge settled into his chair, called the court to order. Bennett rose. Defense calls Corporal Davis to the stand. Davis walked forward, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. The bailiff held out a Bible. Davis placed his hand on it, swore to tell the truth, sat down. The chair was hard, the room silent, every eye on him. Bennett approached. "Corporal Davis, tell the court what happened on August 14th. Davis took a breath, started from the beginning. The convoy from Arizona, the wounded men, the drive. He kept his voice level, factual. When he got to Camp Shelby, he described the scene, the infirmary, the German prisoners, Captain Richter's order to wait. Bennett stopped him. "What did you think when you heard that order?" Warner stood. "Objection. Calls for speculation." Patterson looked at Bennett. "Rephrase." Bennett nodded. "What did you do when you heard the order?" Davis met his eyes. "I followed it, sir." At first, Bennett walked him through the timeline, Wilson's deteriorating condition, the nurse who refused entry, Franklin's screaming, the German prisoners being treated. With each detail, Davis felt the weight pressing down, the memory of that heat, that dust, those flies. He described Wilson's death. His voice cracked slightly, had to pause, swallow, continue. Private Wilson died at 15:30 hours. I closed his eyes. He was 22 years old. The room was quiet. Bennett let the silence sit. Then he asked the question everyone was waiting for. "Why did you enter that infirmary?" Davis looked at the judge, at the jury, at his men in the gallery. "Because Americans were dying, sir, while the enemy received care. I'm a medic. I took an oath to preserve life. I couldn't watch another brother die when I had the skills to help, when there was equipment sitting empty." Warner jumped up, moved to strike. "The defendant is justifying illegal actions." Patterson held up his hand. "I'll allow it. This is his testimony." Bennett continued. "Did you assault Captain Richter?" Davis shook his head. "No, sir." I pushed past him. He tried to stop me. I kept moving. "Did you assault the doctor?" Davis paused. I grabbed his wrist to stop him from interfering. That lasted maybe 2 seconds. Bennett walked to his table, picked up a paper. "According to medical records, you began an incision on Sergeant Franklin's leg." Davis nodded. "Yes, sir." "Were you authorized to perform surgery?" "No, sir." "Why did you do it?" Davis looked at his hands. "Because the doctor refused, because Franklin was dying, because someone had to try." Bennett returned to his seat. "Your witness." Warner stood, buttoned his jacket, walked slowly toward the stand. "Corporal Davis, you understand military law?" Davis met his gaze. "Yes, sir." "You understand the chain of command?" "Yes, sir." "You understand that orders must be followed, even when you disagree with them?" Davis felt the trap. "Yes, sir. In most cases." Warner smiled. "In most cases, who decides which cases are exceptions?" Davis's jaw tightened. "The commanding officer on scene." Warner's voice rose. "And who was the commanding officer on scene that day?" Davis didn't answer. Warner pressed. "Was it you, Corporal?" "No, sir." "Was it Captain Richter?" "Yes, sir." So when Captain Richter gave you an order to wait, and you disobeyed, you violated military law. Davis's hands gripped the armrests. I acted to save lives. Warner turned to the jury. That's not what I asked. Did you violate military law, yes or no? Davis felt Bennett's eyes on him, knew the answer would condemn him, but he'd sworn to tell the truth. Yes, sir, I did. Warner walked back to his table, picked up another file. Let's talk about the Geneva Convention. You're familiar with it? Davis nodded. Somewhat, sir. Warner read from the document. All prisoners of war shall receive adequate medical care without discrimination. Do you know why this rule exists? Davis hesitated. To protect captured soldiers, Warner nodded. Exactly, so that when our boys are captured, when they're wounded and helpless in enemy hands, they'll be treated with dignity, with care. Your actions that day, your disregard for these protocols, you put American POWs at risk, every captured soldier who might depend on the enemy following these same rules. Did you think about that? Davis felt the words land. No, sir, I didn't. Warner let it hang. No further questions. Bennett stood for redirect. Corporal Davis, how many American soldiers died waiting for treatment that day? Davis's voice was quiet. 2, sir, Wilson and Franklin. How many German prisoners died? None, sir. Bennett walked to the evidence table, picked up a stack of photographs. These are from the infirmary. Taken the day after, he handed them to Davis. Describe what you see. Davis looked at the images. German prisoners in beds, clean sheets, IV drips, bandaged wounds, medical equipment on rolling carts. He described each photo. Bennett took them back. And outside, where your men waited, Davis closed his eyes, saw it again. Dirt, blood, flies, nothing. No beds, no equipment, no care. Bennett returned to his seat. The courtroom buzzed, whispers spreading. Patterson banged his gavel. Order. The judge looked at Bennett. Any other witnesses? Bennett shook his head. Defense rests, Your Honor. Patterson checked his watch. We'll break for lunch. Closing arguments at 1300 hours. Court adjourned. The gavel fell. Davis was led out. Back to the holding room. Bennett followed, sat across from him. You did well. Davis didn't feel it. I admitted to everything. Bennett leaned forward. You told the truth. That's all we can do. Now we wait. The jury will decide. Lunch was brought. Davis couldn't eat. His stomach twisted. He thought about Warner's words, about putting American POWs at risk, about the bigger picture. He'd been so focused on his men, on that moment. He hadn't thought about consequences beyond the fence, beyond the day. Maybe Warner was right. Maybe he'd been selfish, short-sighted, dangerous. 1300 hours came. The courtroom filled again. Patterson took his bench, called for closing arguments. Warner went first. He stood before the jury, 6 officers, all white, all career military. He painted Davis as reckless, emotional, a threat to order. He talked about discipline, about the chain of command, about how armies function, how wars are won, not through individual heroics, but through structure, through following orders even when they're hard, even when they hurt. He pointed at Davis. This man believed his judgment was superior to his commanders, his compassion more important than protocol, and in doing so, he undermined everything that keeps soldiers alive, everything that separates us from chaos. He sat down. Bennett stood, walked to the jury, said nothing for a long moment. Then he spoke. Gentlemen, you've heard the prosecution's case. You've heard about order, about discipline, about the Geneva Convention, all important, all necessary. But let me ask you something. He paused. What is the purpose of military law? The jury stared. Is it to protect the enemy, or is it to protect our own? Bennett walked to the evidence table, picked up the photographs again. 2 men died. Americans. While enemy soldiers received care. That is fact, not opinion, not emotion, fact. He set down the photos. Now. Did Corporal Davis break the rules? Yes. Should he have? The prosecution says no, I say this. When the rules require you to watch your brothers die, when the rules value enemy lives over American lives, when the rules create the very injustice they claim to prevent, then maybe the rules are wrong. Warner jumped up. Objection. Counsel is arguing policy, not law. Patterson considered. Overruled. This is closing argument. I'll allow it. Bennett continued. Corporal Davis is a medic, trained to save lives. He watched Private Wilson drown in his own blood, watched Sergeant Franklin's infection spread, while equipment sat empty, while German officers drank coffee. He made a choice. The same choice any of you would make, to save his brothers, to fulfill his oath, and for that, the prosecution wants 20 years. He turned to Davis. Look at him. A man who served with honor, who tried to heal, who put others before himself. And ask yourselves, is this justice? Or is this a system protecting itself from being questioned? Bennett sat down. The room was silent. Patterson looked at the jury. Gentlemen, you've heard the evidence, the testimony, the arguments. You will now deliberate, determine guilt or innocence on each charge. Remember, this is about law, not sympathy, not politics, law. He stood. Court is in recess until a verdict is reached. The gavel fell. The jury filed out. Davis was taken back to his cell. Bennett stayed in the courtroom, gathering his papers. Hours passed. Davis lay on his cot, stared at the ceiling, tried not to think, failed. Every scenario played out. Guilty. 20 years. Hard labor. His mother's face when she heard, his men's careers destroyed, innocent, freedom, but the doubt, the questions. Did he do the right thing or just the thing that felt right? There's a difference, sometimes. Evening came. A guard brought dinner. Davis didn't touch it, his stomach too tight. He heard voices, boots. The door opened. Bennett stood there, his face unreadable. Their back. Davis stood. Already. Bennett nodded. Fast verdict. Could mean anything. Let's go. The walk to the courtroom felt longer than before, each step heavy. Davis's heart pounded. They entered. The room was packed, everyone back, waiting. Davis took his seat, Bennett beside him. The jury filed in, their faces blank, professional. Patterson entered, sat, looked at the foreman. A lieutenant colonel, grey hair, hard eyes. As the jury reached a verdict, the foreman stood. We have your honor. Patterson gestured. Proceed. The foreman unfolded a paper. Read slowly. On the charge of assault of a superior officer, we find the defendant. Davis held his breath. Guilty. The word hit like a fist. Bennett's hand found his arm, squeezed. The foreman continued. On the charge of disobeying a direct order. Guilty. On the charge of inciting mutiny. Not guilty. Davis felt his chest loosen slightly. One small mercy. Patterson looked at Davis. Stand for sentencing. Davis stood, legs shaking. The judge shuffled papers. Corporal Davis, you have been found guilty of assault and disobedience, serious charges in wartime. Normally this would carry significant prison time. However, he paused, the court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances, the moral weight of your decision. Therefore, sentence is reduced to dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, time served. You are free to go. The room erupted. Voices, gasps. Warner shot to his feet. Your Honor, this is Patterson's gavel came down. Order, Counselor. I've made my ruling. Davis stood frozen. Bennett pulled him down into his seat, whispered, It's over. You're free. Davis couldn't process it. Free. Dishonorably discharged. Career destroyed, but free. Patterson continued. As for the other defendants, Lewis, Thompson, Rodriguez, Hayes, charges dismissed. All of them, they acted under orders from their commanding officer. No criminal intent. They are restored to duty, effective immediately. Davis turned, saw his men in the gallery, saw their faces, relief, joy. Lewis was crying, Thompson grinning. They were safe, all of them, safe. Patterson banged his gavel one final time. This court is adjourned. He stood, left through his chamber's door. The room dissolved into chaos, reporters rushing forward, officers arguing. Bennett grabbed Davis, pulled him toward the side exit. We need to go, now, before this gets worse. Outside, the evening air was cool. Davis breathed it in, felt different somehow. He was no longer a soldier, no longer bound by the uniform, the weight of it, the pressure gone. But so was everything else, the pride, the purpose, the brotherhood. Bennett walked him to the gate. The MPs didn't stop them, just opened it, let him through. Davis stood on the other side, looked back at Camp Shelby, at the buildings, the fences, the flag. 24 hours ago he'd been Corporal Davis, 92nd Infantry Division, medic. Now he was just Davis, a man with no rank, no unit, no home. His men caught up, all four of them. Lewis reached him first, grabbed him in a hug. You did it, Sarge. You saved us. Davis pulled back, his voice rough. I'm not Sarge anymore. Lewis shook his head. You'll always be Sarge. They stood there, 5 men, brothers, bound by something deeper than uniform or rank, bound by that day, that choice, that moment when everything changed. A car pulled up. Negro driver. Leaned out. You, Davis. Davis nodded. Got orders to take you to the station. Train's leaving in an hour. Davis looked at his men. Where are you headed? Lewis answered. Back to Arizona. Reassignment pending. Davis nodded, tried to smile. Good. Be safe. Thompson stepped forward. What about you? Where will you go? Davis hadn't thought about it, hadn't planned beyond the trial. I don't know. Home, maybe. Lewis pulled an envelope from his pocket. We took a collection, all of us, the whole unit. It's not much, but... He pressed it into Davis's hand. For the road. Davis opened it. Bills, $20 bills, 50s. He tried to hand it back. I can't. Hayes pushed his hand away. Yes, you can. You gave everything for us. Least we can do. Davis felt his throat close, couldn't speak, just nodded. The driver called out, We need to go. Davis climbed into the car, looked back at his men one last time. Take care of each other. Lewis saluted, even though Davis wasn't a soldier anymore. Couldn't return it. The gesture meant everything. The car pulled away, drove through camp, past the infirmary, past the barracks, past the stockade where Davis had spent 2 weeks. Out the gate, onto the highway. The sun was setting, orange light across the trees. Davis leaned his head against the window, thought about Wilson, about Franklin, about the price of doing right. Sometimes the cost is everything. Sometimes you pay it anyway, because some things matter more than safety, more than career, more than anything. The train station was small. Davis bought a ticket to Georgia, to his mother. The platform was empty, just him and one other man, older, white, veteran from the First War, judging by his limp. They didn't speak, just waited. The train arrived. Davis climbed aboard, found a seat in the colored section, looked out the window as the train pulled away. Mississippi disappearing behind him, taking with it everything he'd been, everything he'd believed, leaving him with only what he'd done, and the knowledge that he'd do it again, every time, without question. Some lines are worth crossing, some prices worth paying, some brothers worth any cost. The train rattled through Alabama as night fell. Davis watched his reflection in the window, a man in civilian clothes, no uniform, no insignia, just a shirt and trousers from the collection his men had taken. The envelope of money sat in his pocket, heavy, not from weight, but from meaning. Every dollar represented someone who believed, someone who understood, someone who'd been there. Georgia arrived at dawn. The train pulled into Atlanta. Davis stepped onto the platform. The air smelled different, like home, like memory. He caught a bus south, toward Macon, toward the house where his mother waited. The bus driver made him sit in back. Davis didn't argue, didn't have the energy. He just took his seat, watched the countryside roll past. Pine trees, red dirt, cotton fields. Nothing had changed out here. The war felt distant, like something happening on another planet. His mother was hanging laundry when he walked up the dirt road. She saw him, dropped the sheet, ran. Davis caught her, held her tight. She was crying. He was too. They stood there in the yard, under the Georgia sun, not speaking, just holding. Finally she pulled back, looked at his face, his clothes. "Where's your uniform?" Davis couldn't meet her eyes. "It's gone, Mama." She understood immediately. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh, baby." What happened? Davis told her everything, right there in the yard. The convoy, Wilson, Franklin, the infirmary, the trial, the discharge. When he finished, she was quiet. Then she cupped his face in her hands, her voice firm. "You did right. You hear me? You did what was right." Davis nodded, tried to believe it. The first weeks were hard. Davis tried to find work, applied at hospitals, clinics. Every door closed. The dishonorable discharge followed him. Employers saw it, asked questions, turned him away. One doctor was blunt. "I can't hire someone the Army rejected, doesn't matter why." Davis understood. The system protected itself, always had, always would. He took odd jobs, construction, hauling, loading docks. The work was honest, but it wasn't healing, wasn't medicine. Every night he came home exhausted, his hands rough, his back aching. His mother watched him, worried. One evening she sat him down. "This isn't you." Davis looked at his calloused palms. "Maybe it is now." She shook her head. "You're a healer. That doesn't change because some judge took your uniform. Find another way." Davis thought about her words, started volunteering. A colored clinic on the east side needed help. No pay, no official capacity, but they needed hands. Davis showed up. The doctor in charge was old, gray hair, tired eyes. He looked at Davis's discharge papers, read them carefully, then set them down. "Can you suture?" Davis nodded. "Can you set a bone?" "Yes, sir." The doctor handed him gloves. "Then get to work. We don't care about papers here, just results." Davis fell into the rhythm. Mornings at the docks, evenings at the clinic. The work was hard, the pay barely enough, but for the first time since Mississippi, he felt whole, felt like himself. The clinic served sharecroppers, factory workers, people who couldn't afford regular doctors. Davis stitched wounds, treated infections, delivered babies. No one asked about his past. They just thanked him, shook his hand, came back when they needed help. 6 months passed, then a letter arrived from Lewis. Davis tore it open, read quickly. Lewis wrote that the 92nd Infantry had shipped overseas. Italy. They were in combat, real combat. Thompson had been wounded, shrapnel, but survived. Hayes earned a medal. Rodriguez was promoted. They asked about Davis, wanted to know how he was, if he was okay. Lewis ended the letter with one line. "We carry you with us, Sarge. Every mission, every fight." Davis folded the letter, put it in his pocket, carried it everywhere, on the docks, at the clinic. A reminder that he'd been part of something, that his choice had mattered, that his men remembered. Winter came, then spring. The war in Europe ended, Germany surrendered. Davis heard the news on the radio, felt nothing, no joy, no relief. The war had taken everything from him already, what was left to feel. Then summer. Japan surrendered. VJ Day. The whole country celebrated. Davis worked his shift, came home. His mother asked if he wanted to go to town, see the parade. Davis shook his head. "That's not my war anymore, Mama." She didn't push. Veterans came home, flooded back. The GI Bill passed, benefits, education, housing loans. Davis applied, was rejected. Dishonorable discharge made him ineligible. He watched men he'd served with, men who'd followed orders, who'd stayed quiet. They got houses, got degrees, built lives. Davis got nothing. The bitterness crept in, late at night, when he couldn't sleep, when the memories pressed too hard. He'd think about Wilson, about Franklin, about the choice. Wonder if it was worth it. But then morning came. The clinic opened. Patients arrived. A child with fever, a woman with infection, a man with a broken arm. Davis treated them, each one, with the same care, the same skill, the same conviction that had driven him into that infirmary. And slowly, the bitterness faded, replaced by something else, purpose maybe, or peace. He couldn't name it, didn't need to. Years passed. Davis married, a teacher named Ruth. They had 3 children, 2 boys, 1 girl. He never told them about the trial, about the discharge, just said he'd served, done his part, come home. Ruth knew the truth. He'd told her before they married, needed her to understand who she was marrying. She'd listened, then said one thing: "You chose lives over orders. That's the man I want." They married a month later. The clinic grew, more volunteers, more patients. The old doctor retired, asked Davis to take over, but Davis couldn't. No license, no credentials. Dishonorable discharge blocked everything. So he stayed assistant, worked in the shadows, let others get the credit, didn't care. The work mattered, not the recognition. In 1948, President Truman signed an executive order, integrated the military, ended segregation in the armed forces. Davis read about it in the newspaper, felt something stir. Maybe change was possible. Maybe the system could bend. Maybe his choice, his stand, had been part of something larger, a crack in the wall, one of many, but still a crack. Lewis visited in 1950, showed up at Davis's door, uniform pressed, ribbons on his chest, sergeant stripes. They embraced, sat on the porch, talked for hours. Lewis told stories about Italy, about the war, about coming home. Then he grew quiet, pulled something from his bag. It was a medal, Bronze Star. Lewis held it out. "This is yours." Davis shook his head. "That's your medal." Lewis pushed it into his hand. "No, it's ours. All of us. We earned it together. That day in Mississippi, every day after. You taught us something, Sarge. That courage isn't following orders. It's knowing when to break them." Davis looked at the medal, felt its weight, its meaning. He tried to give it back. Lewis refused. "Keep it. Remember what you did, what you stood for." Davis set it on the table between them. "Thank you for remembering." Lewis smiled. "How could we forget?" They sat in silence, 2 men, brothers, bound by a moment that had defined both of them. Finally, Lewis stood, had to catch a train. Davis walked him to the road. They shook hands. Lewis turned back once. His voice carried across the distance. "You saved us, Sarge, more ways than you know." Then he was gone. Davis went back to the porch, picked up the medal, took it inside, showed Ruth. She held it, her eyes bright. "This is who you are. Not the discharge, not the trial. This." Davis nodded, put the medal in a drawer, didn't need to look at it, knew what it meant, knew what it cost, knew it was worth it. The 1960s brought change, civil rights movement, sit-ins, marches, freedom riders. Davis watched, supported quietly, donated what he could. His children asked why he didn't march, didn't join. Davis said he'd done his marching. They didn't understand. Not yet. Maybe one day. In 1963, Martin Luther King spoke in Washington. Davis listened on the radio, heard the dream, about equality, about justice, about a country living up to its promises. Davis thought about Camp Shelby, about the infirmary, about the choice between right and legal. King's words echoed what Davis had always known, that sometimes the law is wrong, that sometimes breaking it is the only moral choice, that sometimes you have to risk everything for what matters. The clinic stayed busy. Davis trained younger volunteers, taught them sutures, bandaging, triage, passed on what he knew, what he'd learned, not just medicine but principle. He told them about Wilson, about Franklin, about the moment he'd had to choose. Some understood, others didn't. Davis didn't judge. Everyone had to find their own line, their own moment, their own choice. His children grew, his sons went to college, his daughter became a nurse, real nurse, licensed. Everything Davis couldn't be, he was proud, so proud. She asked him once why he never got his license. Davis explained, the discharge, the barriers. She got angry, said it wasn't fair. Davis smiled. No, it's not. But life rarely is. What matters is what you do with it. She didn't argue, just hugged him. In 1977, Ruth got sick, cancer. Davis took care of her, used everything he knew, every skill, every technique. It wasn't enough. She died that fall. Davis held her hand, told her he loved her. She smiled, said she knew, said she'd always known. Then she was gone. Davis felt a hole open. One that wouldn't close, wouldn't heal. He kept working, kept moving, because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. His children rallied, took turns visiting, making sure he ate, slept, didn't disappear into grief. Slowly he came back, not whole, but functional. The clinic needed him. Patients needed him. He couldn't quit, wouldn't quit. Ruth wouldn't have wanted that. The old doctor from the clinic had died years ago, but others came, younger doctors, progressive. One asked Davis why he never pursued his license again. Times had changed. Davis shook his head. That door closed 30 years ago. I've made peace with it. The doctor persisted. There are programs now, for veterans, even with dishonorable discharges. Cases reviewed. Davis thought about it, decided against it. I don't need validation. I know what I did, what I am. That's enough. But the conversation planted something, a seed. Davis thought about his story, about whether anyone would care, whether it mattered. His daughter pushed him, said he should tell it, write it down, leave something. Davis resisted. Then she showed him a newspaper article about Japanese POWs, about how they'd been treated, given food, medical care, while American soldiers sometimes went without. The parallel struck him. His story wasn't unique, wasn't isolated. It was part of something bigger, a pattern, a system that valued protocol over people, rules over right. Davis started writing, late at night, when sleep wouldn't come. He wrote about the convoy, about Wilson's eyes, about Franklin's screams, about the choice, about the trial, about everything after. The words came slowly, painfully, but they came. He filled notebooks, didn't know what he'd do with them, just knew they needed to exist, needed to be real. In 1983, Davis had a heart attack, small, but a warning. His children insisted he retire, move in with one of them. Davis refused. The clinic needed him. He was 80, still working, still healing, still fighting. The doctors told him to slow down. Davis smiled. I've been hearing that my whole life. Never listened. Why start now? He did slow down, though, cut his hours, took more time, spent afternoons on the porch, thinking, remembering. One day a young man appeared, journalist, working on a story about the 92nd Infantry Division. Someone had mentioned Davis. The journalist asked questions. Davis answered, carefully, honestly, about everything. The journalist took notes, asked if he could publish it. Davis hesitated, then agreed. On one condition, tell the whole truth, not just my side, the policy, the reasons, the consequences, all of it. The journalist promised. The article ran 6 months later, front page of a Negro newspaper. The headline read, "The Medic Who Chose Brothers Over Orders." Davis's daughter bought 10 copies, framed one, hung it in his house. Davis looked at it once, then turned away. It's just words. The journalist had done right, though. Told the full story, the Geneva Convention, the rationale, the impossible position, the price paid. Some readers understood. Others called Davis a criminal, said he'd undermined the system, put soldiers at risk. Davis read the letters, nodded, said they weren't wrong, just incomplete. The truth was bigger than any one perspective. Any one choice. His health declined, slowly, then faster. In 1986, Davis knew the end was coming. He gathered his children, told them he loved them, told them to be proud, to stand up, to do right even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. His daughter held his hand, asked if he had regrets. Davis thought about it, about the discharge, about the lost career, the closed doors, the decades in shadows. Then he thought about Wilson, about Franklin, about his men walking free, about the clinic, about every life he'd touched, every patient he'd saved. He looked at his daughter. No regrets. I'd do it all again. Davis died 2 days later. Quiet, peaceful. His children were there, his grandchildren. The room was full of love, full of family, full of everything he'd built, despite the system trying to break him. The funeral was large, packed. Veterans came, patients, volunteers, people whose lives he'd touched, changed, saved. Lewis was there, old now, frail, but standing straight. He saluted the casket, tears running, whispered something no one else heard. "Thank you, Sarge, for everything." They buried Davis in a colored cemetery on the south side. Simple headstone, his name, his dates. His daughter wanted to add his rank. Davis had forbidden it. No rank, no medals, just my name. That's all that matters. But she added one line. A healer, a brother, a man who chose right. Davis would have smiled, would have said it was too much, but deep down, he would have been proud. Years later, the story spread. More journalists, historians, the notebooks were published, became required reading in some medical ethics classes. The choice Davis made, the price he paid, the system that forced it, all of it studied, debated, analyzed. Some said he was a hero, others a cautionary tale. Davis would have said he was neither. Just a man faced with an impossible choice who did what he thought was right and lived with the consequences. The medal Lewis gave him stayed in the drawer. His daughter found it after he died, held it, cried, donated it to a military museum. They displayed it with his story, with photographs, with excerpts from the notebooks. Visitors read it. Some understood, others walked past. But it was there, permanent. A reminder that courage isn't always loud, isn't always celebrated. Sometimes courage is quiet, is costly, is doing what you know is right, even when the world says you're wrong. The Geneva Convention is still taught, still followed, still protects prisoners. That's important, necessary. But Davis's story is taught too now, as a reminder that no system is perfect, that sometimes the rules create the very injustice they claim to prevent, that sometimes the most moral choice is the illegal one, that sometimes you have to choose between right and live with whatever comes after. In the end, Davis's legacy wasn't the trial or the discharge or the headlines. It was simpler than that. It was Wilson's mother receiving his body. It was Franklin's family knowing someone tried. It was 20 men walking free. It was decades of patients healed. It was children raised with principle. It was one man's refusal to let the system define his worth, his humanity, his choice. The war ended 70 years ago. Camp Shelby still stands. The infirmary is a museum now. They tell Davis's story there, show the room where he made his stand, where he crossed the line, where he chose brothers over orders. Visitors stand in that spot. Try to imagine it. The heat, the flies, the dying men, the choice. Most can't. But some understand. Some see themselves, see the impossible position, see the courage it took to say no, to say this is wrong, to say my brothers matter more than protocol. That's the lesson. Not that Davis was perfect. He wasn't. Not that he was right about everything. He made mistakes, but in that moment, in that choice, he was what every soldier should be, human, compassionate, willing to risk everything for the person next to him. That's what matters. That's what endures. That's what makes his story worth remembering. Because the question isn't whether you'd follow orders. The question is whether you'd know when not to, whether you'd have the courage to stand up, to face the consequences, to choose right over easy. Davis did, and it cost him everything, and he never regretted it, not once, not ever. That's the man he was, that's the legacy he left, that's the story worth telling.